the rich and powerful move in silence. Ava Sinclair, the billionaire CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, had spent years building her empire from nothing. Her name commanded respect in boardrooms, her signature could change the fate of industries, and her influence stretched across continents. But today, she was just another passenger. No designer dresses, no flashy jewelry, just a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. She wanted to see the world from the eyes of the ordinary, to blend into the background. But as she would soon find out, some people only respect wealth when they can see it. Welcome back to my channel. You will not believe what happens in this story. It is shocking, emotional, and full of twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Now, let us get started. Ava boarded the luxurious private jet, a plane that belonged to her, though no one around her knew it yet. She had purchased Sinclair Air years ago, transforming it into the leading name in luxury aviation. And yet, despite her power, the moment she stepped into the first-class cabin, she could feel the weight of judgment. Wealthy passengers stole sideways glances, some with curiosity, others with quiet disapproval. She was used to it. Money did not erase prejudice. As she settled into her plush seat by the window, she reached for the menu. That was when she heard it. The sharp voice of authority, dripping with disdain. "Excuse me, miss." Ava looked up. Standing over her with an icy glare was Jessica Reynolds, the senior flight attendant. With over a decade of experience, Jessica had mastered the art of serving the wealthy with a smile, as long as they looked the part. Jessica's eyes traveled over Ava's casual clothes, her brown skin, her lack of visible wealth. Her expression hardened. "This section is for first-class passengers only," Jessica said, folding her arms. "The economy seats are in the back." Ava held her gaze. She was not surprised, but she was disappointed. "I am in the right seat," she said, keeping her tone polite but firm. Jessica barely concealed her irritation. "Let me see your ticket." Ava handed it over, watching as Jessica's eyes flicked over the details. But instead of apologizing, the woman let out a small, scoffing laugh. "I do not know how you got this seat, but we do not allow free upgrades, and first class is expensive," Jessica said, emphasizing the last word as if Ava could not possibly afford it. A few passengers turned to watch. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others smirked, enjoying the spectacle of a woman they assumed did not belong. Ava could have revealed herself right then and there. She could have exposed the truth and put Jessica in her place. But she did not. She wanted to see just how far this woman would take her arrogance. Jessica, misreading Ava's silence as defeat, made her next move. A move that would cost her everything. With an air of superiority, she slapped the ticket against Ava's chest. Not handed, not placed, slapped. The paper crinkled under the force. A sharp gasp filled the cabin. A businessman in a tailored suit glanced over his newspaper. A woman in pearls clutched her purse tighter, and the tension in the air became suffocating. But Ava? She did not move. She did not react. She just stared. A stare so calm, so controlled, it was terrifying. Jessica had no idea she had just made the worst mistake of her career. For a moment, the entire first-class cabin was frozen. The weight of Jessica's arrogance hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Passengers exchanged awkward glances, unsure of what to do. Some silently approved of the humiliation, believing Ava did not belong. Others were simply entertained by the spectacle. But one thing was certain. No one expected what would happen next. Ava took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the ticket Jessica had just slapped against her. Her heart did not race, her expression did not change. She had been disrespected before, but never on her own plane. Jessica smirked, mistaking Ava's silence for submission. "If you cannot afford first class, maybe do not fake it next time," she added with a chuckle, turning to the next passenger as if Ava was not even worth her time. That was the final straw. Ava leaned back, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her lips. "You are right," she said, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "I should probably report this to management." Jessica laughed, an arrogant, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Do you think complaining will get you a free seat next time?" The other flight attendants shifted uncomfortably. A few knew who Ava was. They knew the truth. But no one dared to speak. Not yet. Ava tilted her head. "No, not a free seat, but maybe a free lesson. In consequences." Before Jessica could respond, the intercom crackled to life. A voice, calm and professional, echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We are preparing for takeoff. Please make sure your seats are upright and tray tables are secured. Our flight today is owned and operated by Sinclair Air, a proud part of Sinclair Enterprises, led by none other than our distinguished CEO, Ms. Ava Sinclair." Ava did not even have to turn her head. She felt it, the shift in the air, the realization sinking into Jessica's bones. The color drained from Jessica's face. Her body stiffened. Her arrogant smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Passengers who had been quietly judging Ava suddenly sat up straighter. A man who had been watching with mild amusement now looked genuinely uneasy. A woman who had clutched her pearls now covered her mouth in shock. Jessica blinked rapidly, trying to process what she had just heard. Number it could not be. She turned back to Ava, her lips parting slightly. "You—" Ava raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Something wrong, Jessica?" Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She had humiliated a woman she thought was beneath her. She had slapped a ticket against the chest of the very billionaire who owned the plane she worked on. And now? She was about to learn what real power looked like. Jessica's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the nearest seat. Her world had just turned upside down. The woman she had humiliated, the woman she had dismissed as unworthy of first class, was none other than Ava Sinclair, the billionaire owner of the very airline she worked for. The weight of her mistake settled in like a slow, suffocating wave. Ava, on the other hand, remained perfectly composed. Her deep brown eyes studied Jessica with the kind of patience that was more terrifying than anger. She did not raise her voice. She did not lash out. She did not have to. Passengers were now whispering, stealing nervous glances at Jessica. A man in a business suit who had been quietly entertained by the scene moments ago now looked visibly uncomfortable. A woman adjusting her designer handbag subtly moved farther away from Jessica, as if her downfall might be contagious. Jessica swallowed hard, trying to salvage the situation. "Ms. Sinclair, I did not realize—" Ava held up a single hand. The entire cabin fell silent. "Jessica," she said slowly, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "Tell me, how long have you worked for Sinclair Air?" Jessica's mouth opened and closed, her arrogance completely shattered. 6 years, she finally whispered. Ava nodded, as if considering something. Then she leaned forward slightly, resting her elbow on the armrest. 6 years. That is a long time. I imagine in those years, you have served many high-profile passengers. Jessica nodded quickly, trying to grasp any thread of redemption. Yes, of course. I have handled VIP clients, celebrities, CEOs. Interesting. Ava cut in smoothly. Because in those 6 years, it seems you have not learned one very important lesson. Jessica's breath hitched. You do not measure people by what they wear. You do not measure them by the color of their skin. You do not measure them by your assumptions. Ava's voice remained calm, but the fire beneath her words was unmistakable. You measure them by their character, and today, Jessica, yours has failed you. A sharp gasp rippled through the cabin. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their own silent prejudices. Jessica's entire body tensed, her fingers gripping the edge of a seat for support. She knew what was coming. Ms. Sinclair, please, I was just doing my job. I did not mean— Your job? Ava interrupted, tilting her head. Tell me, is it part of your job to slap a customer's ticket against their chest? Jessica's lips trembled. She had no excuse. Ava leaned back, exhaling softly, as if making a decision. Then she pressed the call button on her seat. Within seconds, another flight attendant appeared. one who had recognized Ava from the moment she stepped on board. "Yes, Ms. Sinclair?" the woman asked with immediate respect. Ava did not break eye contact with Jessica as she spoke. "Call the captain. Tell him we have an immediate personnel change before takeoff." Jessica's entire body went rigid. "No. No, please." Ava's gaze was like ice. "You are dismissed, Jessica." The plane had not even left the ground. But Jessica's career was already over. Jessica's knees nearly buckled. Dismissed? The word hit her like a slap, far harsher than the one she had given Ava's ticket. Panic spread through her chest, tightening like a vice. "Ms. Sinclair, please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. I did not mean to be rude. It was a misunderstanding. Ava simply raised a hand. The cabin was dead silent. Passengers who had once looked on with amusement were now watching with bated breath, their faces a mix of shock and unease. No one had expected this. The arrogant flight attendant, who had strutted through first class with an air of superiority, was now reduced to a desperate, pleading woman. The second flight attendant, the one who had respectfully answered Ava's call, gave Jessica a sympathetic look. But she did not intervene. She simply nodded and walked to the cockpit to inform the captain. Jessica's breathing grew shallow. No, no, no. She had worked too hard to lose everything in an instant. "Miss Sinclair, I have been with this airline for 6 years. I have a family, a mortgage. I cannot lose this job." Jessica's voice cracked, desperation creeping into her tone. Ava tilted her head, studying her. "Oh? Now you want me to consider your situation? Now you want compassion?" Jessica swallowed hard. Ava's voice remained calm, but her words cut like glass. "Where was that compassion when you assumed I did not belong in first class? Where was that consideration when you slapped my ticket against my chest as if I was beneath you?" Jessica had no answer. Ava let the silence hang between them for a long, agonizing moment. Then she exhaled softly. "I am not cruel, Jessica. Firing you would be the easy choice. But I believe in something much more valuable than punishment." Jessica's lips parted slightly, hope flickering in her eyes. "I believe in lessons," Ava finished. Jessica blinked in confusion. "Lessons?" Ava turned slightly, her gaze shifting to the watching passengers. Her voice carried through the cabin with quiet authority. "You see, people like Jessica exist in every industry. People who judge others based on their appearance, their race, their clothes, assuming worth is measured by what they can see. But true power, true success? It does not need to be worn like an accessory." Some passengers lowered their gazes, uncomfortable with the truth in her words. Others nodded subtly, understanding her message. Ava then turned back to Jessica. "Here is what will happen next. You will not be dismissed. You will keep your job, but under one condition." Jessica's eyes widened in disbelief. Anything, Ms. Sinclair. I swear." Ava's lips curved into a knowing smile. "You will spend the next 6 months working economy class." The cabin erupted into hushed gasps. Jessica froze, horror flashing across her face. Economy? The section she had always looked down on? The place where she believed only the unimportant sat? "You want to keep your job?" Ava continued smoothly. "Then you will learn what real customer service is. You will serve the passengers you once dismissed, and you will do it with respect." Jessica looked sick. "And if I hear even one complaint?" Ava's voice lowered, each word carrying a quiet finality. "You will not just lose your job, you will never work in this industry again." Jessica nodded frantically, her arrogance now completely shattered. "Understood?" Ava pressed. Yes, Miss Sinclair, I understand," Jessica choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Ava leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Then take your place where you belong, Jessica. Economy awaits you." Jessica's punishment had been set, and this flight had just become unforgettable. Jessica stumbled back, the weight of Ava's words crashing down on her like a landslide. 6 months in economy. The very idea sent a shiver down her spine. To her, economy was a place for the unimportant, the overlooked, the ones she had spent years dismissing with fake smiles and forced politeness. Now, she would be one of them. Passengers murmured among themselves, some openly smirking at Jessica's downfall, others nodding in approval of Ava's decision. A few even discreetly recorded the scene on their phones, knowing this moment would be talked about for a long time. Jessica clenched her jaw, swallowing the shame burning in her throat. You will not regret this, Ms. Sinclair," she stammered. "I will prove myself." Ava simply tilted her head, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, I do not doubt that. Because if you do not, you will be gone before you can serve the next meal tray." Jessica flinched. There was no room for mistakes. At that moment, the flight attendant who had left to inform the captain returned. She gave Ava a respectful nod before turning to Jessica. "You are reassigned to economy for the remainder of this flight. You will report to the lead attendant in the back." Jessica went pale. The punishment was not just for the future. It started now. Ava picked up the champagne glass from her tray table and took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving Jessica's. "You are dismissed, Jessica." Jessica hesitated, as if hoping for one last chance to undo what had been done. But there was none. Her fate was sealed. With a deep, shaky breath, she turned and walked toward the back of the plane, her head hanging low. Each step she took felt heavier, as if the weight of her arrogance had finally caught up to her. As she disappeared behind the curtain leading to economy, Ava exhaled softly and set down her glass. The moment had passed, but its impact would last far beyond this flight. Just as she was about to settle into her seat, a man across the aisle, a well-dressed older gentleman with salt and pepper hair, cleared his throat. "That," he said, his deep voice laced with admiration, "was one of the most satisfying things I have ever seen." A few passengers chuckled softly, some even clapping in agreement. Ava turned to him, a hint of amusement in her expression. "Some lessons are best taught in real time." The man smiled. "Well, Ms. Sinclair, you just made a lot of people on this plane your biggest fans." Ava simply gave a small, knowing nod. "That was never my intention. But if it makes people rethink how they treat others, then I consider it a success." Just then, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready for takeoff. Flight attendants, please take your seats." As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Ava leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window. The sky stretched wide before her, endless and full of possibility. But little did she know. This flight was far from over, and before it landed, something even more shocking was about to happen. As the plane soared into the sky, the tension in first class finally began to ease. Conversations resumed, glasses clinked, and the hum of luxury settled back into place. But Ava's mind remained sharp. She had put Jessica in her place, but something about the entire situation still did not sit right with her. Had this been an isolated incident? Or was this a deeper issue within her airline? Ava owned Sinclair Air, but she had never gone undercover like this before. If one of her employees had the audacity to treat her that way, how many other passengers had suffered in silence? Her thoughts were interrupted by the flight attendant from earlier, the respectful one. She approached Ava carefully, her hands clasped in front of her. "Ms. Sinclair, may I have a moment?" Ava turned her attention to the woman, offering a small nod. "Of course. What is your name?" "Emily Carter, ma'am. I have been with Sinclair Air for 4 years." Ava studied her carefully. Emily's posture was professional, her tone respectful. There was no arrogance, no superiority, a stark contrast to Jessica. "What is on your mind, Emily?" Ava asked. Emily hesitated for a brief moment, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say what you did back there. It needed to happen. Jessica has been treating passengers like that for years." Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. "Years?" Emily nodded. "She picks and chooses who she treats with respect. If someone looks wealthy, she is all smiles. But if they do not fit her idea of first class, she talks down to them. Or worse, ignores them entirely. Ava's jaw tightened. So this was not an isolated incident. And the other flight attendants? Ava asked. Do they allow it? Emily sighed, glancing around before answering. Some of us try to step in when we can, but Jessica is close with one of the senior supervisors. Every time a complaint is made, it disappears. A lot of us just learn to stay quiet. Ava's fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. Corruption within her own airline. Favoritism. A toxic culture. This was much bigger than Jessica. Ava leaned forward, her gaze sharp. Tell me, Emily, if I were not on this flight today, what do you think would have happened? Emily hesitated, then answered honestly. Jessica would have gotten away with it. Again. Ava inhaled deeply, her mind racing. She had built Sinclair Air with the intention of creating a world-class experience. Luxury. Excellence. Respect. But somewhere along the way, people like Jessica had poisoned that vision. And Ava Sinclair was not the type of woman to let something like that slide. She turned to Emily, her voice calm, but laced with an undeniable authority. Thank you for your honesty, Emily. I will take care of this personally. Emily gave a small, relieved smile. It is an honor working for you, ma'am. Ava nodded, but inside, her decision was already made. This was no longer just about Jessica. This was about every passenger who had ever been mistreated. Every employee who had been afraid to speak up. Every corrupt leader who thought they could twist her airline into something it was never meant to be. Sinclair Air was about to go through a massive reckoning, and Ava Sinclair would make sure of it. But just as she settled back into her seat, ready to plan her next move, a loud commotion erupted from the back of the plane. Voices raised, a child crying, a man's voice, furious, demanding. Ava's eyes snapped open. Something was very, very wrong. And this flight was about to take an even darker turn. Ava's head snapped toward the back of the plane as the commotion grew louder. Passengers turned in their seats, murmurs of concern rippling through the cabin. The tension was thick, pressing down like an approaching storm. Then, a man's furious voice cut through the air. Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am? Ava unbuckled her seatbelt in one smooth motion. The authority in the man's tone, the sheer arrogance, it reminded her of Jessica. Entitlement dripped from every syllable. She exchanged a quick look with Emily. Stay here, Ava instructed. Emily hesitated. Are you sure? Security should handle. I am security, Ava said, already moving. As she stepped through the first-class curtain into business, then economy, the energy in the plane shifted. Passengers whispered. Others watched in fearful silence. And there, near the back of the plane, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a designer suit stood with a vicious glare, towering over a trembling flight attendant. A young mother, cradling a crying toddler, sat in the window seat beside him, her face pale with fear. Jessica, who had been reassigned to economy, stood frozen in the aisle, unsure of what to do. Ava took in the scene instantly, her mind sharp, calculating. The man was drunk. His tie was loose, his face slightly flushed, and the stench of expensive whiskey clung to the air. His glass had spilled onto his lap, and rage twisted his features as he pointed directly at the young mother. This woman's brat kicked me. I paid for this seat. I don't have to sit next to this. He spat the words like poison. The mother's hands tightened protectively around her child, her eyes brimming with tears. I am so sorry, sir. It was an accident. He just turned 3. He does not understand. I do not care. The man slammed his fist against the armrest. I demand she be moved. Now. Ava stepped forward. That is enough. Her voice was smooth, cold, controlled, but it sliced through the chaos like a blade. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw Ava, realizing she had no authority here. She took an uneasy step back. The man turned, his drunken fury shifting toward the unassuming woman in casual clothing. He sneered. And who the hell are you? Ava's lips curved into a deadly smirk. The owner of this airline. Silence. The man's smug expression faltered. You... Ava took another step forward, her posture unshaken, dominating the space. Yes, and let me make something very clear to you. She glanced at the young mother, her gaze softening for just a moment before turning back to the man, her eyes sharp as steel. Sinclair Air does not tolerate harassment. It does not tolerate entitlement, and it certainly does not tolerate men like you thinking your money excuses your behavior. The man flushed a deep red, his fingers tightening into fists. You have no right. Oh, I have every right, Ava interrupted smoothly. And you? She tilted her head slightly. You have two options. The man's jaw clenched. I paid for this damn seat. Ava leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. But somehow, it was more terrifying that way. Option 1. You apologize to this woman and her child. Right now. You sit down, sober up, and finish this flight in silence. The man's mouth opened, outrage flickering in his eyes. Ava smiled coldly. Option 2. You leave my plane. Passengers gasped. Jessica's lips parted in shock. The man blinked. You cannot do that. Ava crossed her arms. I own this airline. I can do whatever I want. The plane felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in. The man was trapped. A flight attendant stepped forward, her voice professional but firm. Ms. Sinclair, the nearest airport is just 15 minutes away. We can arrange an emergency landing if necessary. Ava did not break eye contact with the man. So, what will it be? The man's confidence crumbled. His gaze darted to the watching passengers, to the recording phones, to the inevitable headlines that would come from this. His nostrils flared. He gritted his teeth. Then, finally, his shoulders sagged. I apologize, he muttered. Ava raised an eyebrow. Louder. He swallowed hard, his face burning with humiliation. I apologize, he said again, this time clearer. Ava did not smile. To whom? The man turned stiffly toward the young mother, his hands clenching into fists. I apologize. The woman nodded weakly, clutching her child. Ava exhaled slowly, allowing the moment to settle. Then, in an almost bored tone, she added, And for the record, you are permanently banned from Sinclair Air. I will make sure your name is on the no-fly list before we land. The man stiffened. Passengers erupted into soft cheers. He sank into his seat, face pale, knowing he had lost everything. Ava turned to the young mother, her voice gentle. Are you all right? Tears shimmered in the woman's eyes as she nodded quickly. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ava gave her a reassuring nod, then turned and walked back toward first class. As she settled into her seat, Emily leaned toward her, whispering in awe. You just changed this entire flight, Ms. Sinclair. Ava smirked slightly, taking a sip of her champagne. I was just getting started. But what neither of them knew. Someone on this flight was hiding a secret. And before they landed, Ava was about to uncover something that would change everything. The plane's atmosphere slowly returned to normal, but Ava's mind did not. She sat in first class, swirling the untouched champagne in her glass, her thoughts racing. Something felt off. The arrogant passenger had been dealt with. Jessica had been put in her place. And yet, Ava's instincts were screaming that this flight was far from ordinary. Emily, the only flight attendant she now trusted, approached cautiously. Ms. Sinclair, can I get you anything? Ava shook her head. No, but I need you to do something for me. Emily nodded attentively. I need the passenger manifest, Ava said, her voice calm but firm. Emily hesitated. That is usually restricted information. Ava shot her a look. I own this airline. Emily exhaled sharply. I will get it for you. As Emily disappeared, Ava leaned back, studying the cabin. First class was full of powerful businessmen, socialites, and celebrities. They chatted, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Business class held a mix: corporate travelers, couples, even a few government officials. And economy. That was where Ava's eyes landed. Something in her gut told her the real problem was back there. Emily returned within minutes, discreetly slipping the passenger manifest into Ava's hand. "Here you go, ma'am. I will be nearby if you need me." Ava nodded, unfolding the document. She scanned the list, her eyes moving swiftly down the names. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until her gaze froze. One name. Ava's breath hitched. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. But her instincts whispered otherwise. She turned the page back to the seat assignments. 17C. Ava lifted her gaze toward economy. Her heartbeat quickened. 17C was occupied by a man wearing a dark hoodie, head lowered, as if trying not to be noticed. Her fingers curled around the paper. It was him. The last person she ever expected to see. The man who betrayed her. The man who disappeared 5 years ago, taking millions of dollars from her company with him. And now? He was sitting right here, on her plane. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. Her blood ran cold. "Game over," she whispered. Because if he thought he could sneak away unnoticed, he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Ava's grip tightened on the manifest, her mind spinning. How was he here? Why now? 5 years ago, Ethan Carter had been her most trusted financial advisor. He had worked beside her, helped expand Sinclair Air's global reach, until the day he vanished. Along with $15 million. The betrayal had been public. Headlines screamed her humiliation. Investors pulled out, stocks wavered, and for the first time in her life, Ava Sinclair had looked weak. But she rebuilt. Stronger, smarter, more ruthless. And now, that traitor was sitting in economy, hoping no one would notice. Ava inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay calm. This was not about emotion. This was about revenge. She tapped a button on her armrest. Emily appeared almost instantly. "Yes, Ms. Sinclair?" Ava folded the paper, keeping her expression unreadable. "There is a man in seat 17C, tall, hooded sweatshirt, dark hair. Do not alert him, but I need to know. Has he interacted with anyone? Has he made any unusual requests?" Emily frowned slightly, thinking. "He has been quiet the entire flight, barely spoke to the crew. He did not even order a drink, just asked for water." Ava's jaw clenched. Careful. Calculating. Just like always. "Has he been watching anyone?" Emily hesitated. "Actually, yes. He has been glancing toward first class. A lot." Ava's eyes darkened. Of course, he had been watching. Because he knew who she was. He knew she would eventually find him. He was waiting. Ava exhaled slowly, masking the fury boiling inside her. "Listen carefully," she instructed. "I want the flight deck alerted. The moment we land, security needs to be waiting. No alarms, no sudden movements. We do this quietly." Emily nodded. Understood. Ava's fingers drummed against the armrest as she stared down the aisle, past the first-class curtain, toward the man who had once destroyed her. But she was not the same woman he had betrayed. He had stolen millions. Now, she was going to take everything from him. But just as she leaned back, a chilling thought struck her. Ethan Carter had been running for 5 years. He was smart, careful. So why would he risk getting on her plane? Ava's pulse quickened. Unless he was not running, he was hunting. And before Ava could react, the plane's lights flickered. A sudden jolt rattled the cabin. Then, the emergency alarms blared. Passengers gasped as oxygen masks deployed. Ava's breath caught in her throat. And somewhere in economy, Ethan Carter lifted his head and smirked. Panic erupted in the cabin as the emergency alarms screamed through the plane. Passengers clutched their seats, oxygen masks dropping like lifelines. The aircraft lurched again, and a voice crackled over the intercom, frantic. "This is the captain. We are experiencing a critical system malfunction. Flight crew, prepare for emergency procedures." Ava's blood ran ice cold. Her mind, sharp even under pressure, put the pieces together in an instant. This was not a coincidence. This was Ethan. Her gaze snapped toward economy, searching for him, but he was gone. Ava tore off her seatbelt and stood. "Stay seated, Ms. Sinclair." Emily reached for her, but Ava was already moving, her pulse pounding, her steps unwavering. She shoved through the first-class curtain into chaos. Passengers cried out, gripping their armrests. Flight attendants scrambled to maintain control. The plane shuddered again, losing altitude. And then, she saw him. Ethan Carter. Standing near the emergency exit, his fingers hovering over something. Ava's stomach dropped. A device. Small. Discreet. A remote override. Her breath hitched. "You are behind this," she said, her voice calm. Too calm. Ethan turned slowly, meeting her eyes. And then, he smiled. "You always were the smartest person in the room, Ava," he murmured. "But this time, you are too late." Her hands curled into fists. Passengers were screaming now. The plane was dropping faster. But Ava refused to show fear. "What do you want?" she demanded. Ethan tilted his head. "A deal." Ava's eyes burned with fury. "You stole from me. You betrayed me. And now, you want a deal?" Ethan exhaled, casual, like this was just another business meeting. "You have something I need, Ava. Power, influence, and well, I have your life in my hands." He tapped the device lightly. "Give me $50 million, and I will restore control to the flight system. Say no, and—" The plane jerked violently. Screams filled the cabin. Ava's pulse pounded. $50 million. He thought she would fold. He thought she would bend. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Ava took a slow step forward. "You are making one mistake, Ethan." He raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Ava smirked. "You think I came unprepared." And before he could react, Ava lunged. Her hands shot out, grabbing his wrist. She twisted sharply, and Ethan gasped as the device slipped from his fingers. But Ava was faster. She caught it midair, spun, and slammed her fist straight into his jaw. Crack! Ethan stumbled back, colliding with the emergency door. His eyes widened in shock. Ava did not waste a second. She flipped the device in her palm and pressed the reset button. A tense beat. Then, the alarm stopped. The plane steadied. The oxygen masks dangled uselessly as the aircraft's systems rebooted. Passengers gasped in relief. Ava exhaled slowly. Then, she turned back to Ethan, who was still slumped against the door, groaning. She crouched down beside him, her expression fierce. "I built this empire without you. I rebuilt it after you tried to destroy me. And now?" Her voice dropped into a whisper. "You are nothing." Ethan glared. "This is not over, Ava." She smirked. "Yes, it is." And as the plane began its descent, Ava rose to her feet, unshaken. Security would be waiting for Ethan the moment they landed. Her past, finally buried. And Ava Sinclair, stronger than ever. The end.